we're coming to the end of the year, and what we've been looking at all this year is image design and what makes an amazing image in terms of the content of the image rather than how we're actually technically taking it. And we've looked at lots of different components of design, and all of them contribute to the narrative and the aesthetic of an image, which are the two key components of what makes it engaging. And today we're looking at movement in an image and how photography is almost unique in its timing aspect in art. A lot of art doesn't incorporate that, but with photographers, we get a split second to actually capture what it is we're trying to communicate to the viewer. And so our shutter speed is really important in how we use that, whether it's fast or slow, whether it exaggerates movement or it makes movement not exist. So that's what we're looking at within today's lesson. But we're looking at it specifically of how it acts as a design element within the image. And often it can be there to create a feeling of action, and that's, puts a dynamic in the image. It contributes to the narrative and the emotion when sometimes something is blurry because we've slowed down our shutter speed. It gives a really soft, calming emotion, and it can also exaggerate lines created by movement, and that can help the viewer's eye go through as the visual path through the image. So we can use it a number of ways. And that movement that we do can be the movement of the subject and how we capture that. It can be the movement of the camera, and the subject may be still and the background may be still, but we can move the camera and create an illusion of movement. Or it may be the background moving and the subject still. And so we'll just have a look at how those different scenarios contribute to improving the design of an image. So the first one we're going to have a look at is the different narratives, depending on what's happening with the subject, whether the subject and the background is frozen, whether the subject is frozen and the background is blurred, whether the both of them have been frozen in time. All of them contribute to the narrative. So the first one we're just going to have a look at is a scenario that we typically have where the subject and the background is frozen. But in this case, it had to use a really fast shutter speed. So I'll put the shutter speed down there, that it was a 1/4000th of a second. And I was standing at a rail crossing and could see this train going to go through the crossing, and thought it'd be great to be able to do a snapshot of the people in the carriage to see, just capture that moment in time. And it is a split second, a 4,000th of a second. And I just loved this expression on this little girl's face and the clouds. It provided the whole narrative of capturing that moment in time. So there's some of the ways that you can use your camera tools, your shutter speed, to get different narratives and aesthetics to images. This is where the subject was frozen because I was taking landscapes, but the background is actually moving. And you can see by both of these were taken on a tripod, and the shutter speed was very slow, about 20 to 30 seconds is what I sort of usually take these at. That allows you to get the light streaks, and those light streaks provide lines within your image that provide shapes and also a visual path for your eye to follow through. So taking photographs of night scenes, you have to sometimes try and think outside the box beyond just taking a photograph of the lights on the city, of what can I add to this that will just make it a little bit more powerful. And the other advantage of using that really shutter speed is that in the image on the right, that very high streak was a tram. And obviously it's going to block, that's the headlights on the tram. It's going to block my view of this building entirely. So by slowing down your shutter speed and just getting the streaks, the car goes through faster than what their light streak does. And so you end up with these, without having cars block a scene, you end up with the light streaks actually visually adding to it. Now, that first one, the first heading that we had, this one, was one taken on the Da Nang Bridge in Vietnam. And where I was standing, there was cars non-stop blocking this dragon. And I thought, well, how can I take this that I don't have a car in front of me all the time? And so I had to wait until it was dark enough, and then the cars would go through, but their light was enough to provide some streaks, and it actually gives you a good shot. So think about how that you can be innovative when you've got situations that are not going to be a terribly good image. What can you do about that? So practice this. Just step outside your front door, and you can practice this at any time after dark. The other is when we have subjects moving and they're blurred. So in this case, the shutter speed isn't the 20 seconds we had before, which completely got rid of the cars. This was taken at the Mona Gallery in Tasmania, and I wanted to capture that feeling of chaos, but I needed someone to stand still. And this girl, fortunately, she was taking a photo of one of the exhibition, and this was in one of the main corridors. So it gives you visual components that tell you about the space, the fact that the people are moving and it's a fairly busy area, but also that there is somewhere that someone can stop and take a photograph. So try and think about movement as contributing to the aesthetics and the narrative of your image. This is something I have a lot of problems with, is panning and capturing something that's moving really quite fast and panning at the right speed. And this takes a bit of practice. The best place I found to practice locally is the Hawthorn Velodrome, standing in the middle of that and just capturing the people as they go past. This was down at Brighton Beach, and it's a good technique to have that skill set in your armory of things that you can do, because it's a lot more interesting, a photo like this, where you've dropped down the shutter speed to about a 15th second and panned, than just doing a very fast shutter speed and snapshotting it. Then we would have had all the cars in the background and a really cluttered background. Whereas this allows us to blur the background, give us those streaks through it, which add to the aesthetics and the movement and the visual look of it as our eye follows through that visual path, and captures, you can imagine how cluttered this would have looked if I'd just taken it with a fast shutter speed. The other way that we can use movement to really support our aesthetics is actually moving the camera. And this is called intentional camera movement technique. And I said during the year that I'd show you at some point how to do this. And hopefully that we're next out shooting, we can just have a quick workshop before we start, and we can do some intentional camera movement. But I'd really encourage you to practice it over the break. And that's where the subject is still and you move the camera, but you move it fairly quickly. One of the guys in our camera club calls it the swoosh method, because he just goes swoosh. But you need to have a shutter speed that's reasonably slow. And at the end, I've got the details of how you need to set your camera to do this. But I do it down at Brighton Pier when we were down there and there was the boats. There was a lot of clutter in the background, and you couldn't get a really good shot of the boats that didn't look like a snapshot. It just had a lot of clutter in it. So I thought, well, I'll just try this intentional camera movement, because I've got those lovely long masts and I can just go down the mast very quickly with the camera. And so you end up with that really dreamy, arty look associated with your images. sometimes we have unintentional camera movement. When I broke my wrist recently and we went into Chinatown, that's one of the images there on the right. I couldn't hold my camera still because I just couldn't carry the weight of it. So I decided that day we'd have a lot of intentional camera movement because it was unintentional anyway. So just having this technique as a tool in your armory, you can drag it out when you can't do anything else. And that was the same with the one up the top here. It was one taken off my balcony when I was in isolation with COVID and had the broken wrist. Was just wanted to get out in the fresh air and thought, well, I'll get out in the fresh air, take my camera, no, I can't hold it still, and just do some intentional camera movement. So it allows you to shoot in times and places that under circumstances that you otherwise couldn't, or that the visuals that are in front of you are too cluttered or not very aesthetically pleasing, but they do have good color and good light and good tonal comparisons. And as soon as you've got that, you can start to use intentional camera movement to give you an arty image. Now, some people don't like blurred images. I love them. To me, they look like paintings. A lot of people that are really hung up on having really sharp photographs go, no, they're not photographs. To me, they're photographs. Anything that paints with light is a photograph. So how do we do this? Ideally, you use an image stabilized lens, and those lenses actually have a little button on them that you can click to make sure that they're stabilized when you do it, but you can do it with a lens that's not stabilized. You either need to use shutter priority because you need to slow down the shutter speed down to about 1/4 or 1/10 of a second, or shoot in manual mode where you can set your shutter speed to be that. Because you're moving the camera, you need to get that blur within that 1/4 second or 1/10 of a second. Because you've slowed down your shutter speed so much, you're now letting a lot of light in. And that means you need to really stop down your aperture, stop down, get your lowest ISO your camera can go, and stop down your aperture until you can actually get an exposure that works for you. So check your histogram and have a look in the back of the camera, but you need to get as little light by your aperture and your ISO as possible because you've got that slow shutter speed and you're usually out there in good light. Choose subjects where you've got contrasting colours because you're trying to produce sort of streaks through your images, and they need to be either tonal streaks or different hues of colour. So by practicing this, you'll start to see what works and what doesn't work. If everything's got the same tone or the same colour, then you don't get enough differentiation when you're doing your, I could just put my elbows down and just do my swoosh like that. So you move the camera 5 to 20 inches. Some people only just give it a bit of a wiggle, and that sometimes works for smaller subjects. I tend to do bigger swooshes than that, but I tend to take landscapes this way. You don't click your shutter at the end of it. You click your shutter in the middle of the swoosh. So you and press the shutter down as you're going. It's a lot of fun to play with. The amount of movement and shutter speed will give you a different blur, and so that's why playing with it is great. It's great to play with when you just want to get outside and do something and you've got nothing to photograph. Well, just have a play. I do flowers in my garden. I do lampposts. I do all sorts of things this way. Where you set your focal point is quite important because you need to have something that's got reasonably defined within the image. If we just go back, I had the focal point on these trees. These weren't trees, actually. It was just some branches sticking up. By the time I went swoosh, I'd stretched them into trees. This one here, I had the focal point on the masts because you follow the masts up. So you put the focal point in the middle of the image, and that's focused on the focal plane that you want, and then you follow whatever the shape is that you're trying to follow upwards. So you focus and follow the linear structures within the image, and that's what stretches them for you and gives you something within your image that has a bit of definition. Because at the end of the day, if someone sees a blurry image, they think, oh, you just moved the camera wide, you didn't keep the camera still, didn't have fast enough shutter speed. Whereas there's something in there sharp, it gives the viewer an idea that this is a deliberate artistic effect that you're trying to do, and it allows them to rest their eye on something. So in the one on the left here at the bottom, that was just some waves coming into a shore, and the beach was one very ordinary beach. And we'd gone down there, and I thought I'd take my camera, and I thought, well, I don't want photos of this. And so I thought, just the way the darkness of the sea and the edge froth on the shoreline and the sand had enough tonal differences and enough color differences to, in this case, I moved the camera horizontally. The one up the top was just a forest. It had some burnt trees in it, and the burnt trees gave me the darkness, and some of the newer trees and the newer growth was the lighter growth, and I swished up and downwards. The one on the right, I actually took two shots. I took one where I could have done it in camera with double exposure, but at that point I didn't know how to do that. I took one of the leaf that was sharp, and then I took a second photograph and swished it, and then in Photoshop put them in layers and then just exposed a little bit of the sharp leaf. So you can see you can get creative with this method and produce artistic work. And some of this work, if you want to put your photographs on the wall, these end up looking more like art than something that you just took, like a very ordinary beach. The autumn leaves were in my back garden. This was one very ordinary forest. But you can turn that into art. So that's what I want you to do during the break, is look at images that imply there has been movement involved, whether of the subject or of the camera, and try shooting, work out how you would shoot it based on what I've given you, and then start having a go at it and really practice these ICM shots. But I do warn you that it is addictive. Once you start doing it, you can almost not stop, because you get these great looks and you think, oh, I wonder if I did this, I wonder if I did that. And it's really nice to move from straight documentary photography into artistic photography and back. It just makes those creative juices run. So please, over the break, go through any of the videos that you didn't get a chance to catch up on during the year while we were covering these design elements. But even if you did see them all, just go back and visit them again to keep those ideas of what can contribute to making a great image in your mind, so that when you are out there with your camera, you can think, well, yeah, I've taken this photo and it sort of looks all right. What of the things that we've learnt during the year can I add to this to take it from just being an okay photo to something that people go, wow, that's interesting. So that's your homework over the break. And thank you.